Welcome, everyone. Today, we're diving into a deeply fascinating, albeit pretty dark, explainer. We're going to unpack the anatomy of fear in history, specifically how sheer terror was weaponized to build, control, and really define some of the most formidable powers the world has ever seen. We often think of history in terms of grand conquests and brilliant strategies, but sometimes the true foundation of an empire was, well, something much more sinister.
Think about this. Did you know there were rulers whose very names made entire empires tremble? It's a stark historical reality. While some leaders killed thousands in their blind pursuit of power, others took a totally different path. They turned fear itself into their greatest strength, wielding it as a meticulously calculated tool to maintain an absolute iron grip on their thrones. Today, we're going to look at a selection of kings and a queen who are universally counted among the most cruel and harsh rulers in the world.
Okay, let's dive right into this. To truly understand this phenomenon, we're going to take a chronological journey across several centuries. We're starting way back in the 1st century with the Roman Empire, leaping forward to the 13th century Mongol Empire, and then unpacking the brutal realities of 15th and 16th century Europe and Russia.
So here is our roadmap for today's explainer. We'll start with the weapon of fear, then move to Roman emperors of chaos, check out the Mongol conquest, followed by blood and iron in Europe and the first Russian Tsar. Finally, we'll wrap up with some crucial lessons from history.
Section 1. The Weapon of Fear. How Fear Became Power. See, we aren't just looking at random acts of bloodshed today. We're examining how dread was systematically utilized. As history shows us, some rulers killed for power, while others turned fear itself into their greatest weapon. It wasn't just about eliminating enemies, right? It was about sending a chilling message to anyone who might even think of challenging their authority. Let's head over to our first historical era and see exactly how this played out. Section 2. Roman Emperors of Chaos, Madness or Myth. When we look at the ancient Roman era, we're presented with a really fascinating contrast. On one hand, ancient sources cite infamous acts, bizarre decisions, incredibly harsh punishments, and catastrophic events like the Great Fire of Rome. Yet historians today constantly warn us that these accounts might contain heavy political exaggerations, essentially meant to smear these emperors' reputations after they died. We really have to balance both sides here.
Take Emperor Nero, for example. Nero was known for his immense luxury and a highly controversial rule. Ancient sources tell us he handed out incredibly harsh punishments to political opponents, and most famously, he was blamed by his contemporaries for the Great Fire of Rome. But keeping our objective lens here, we have to remember that these claims, like him starting the fire or dancing while Rome burned, are still heavily debated by historians today.
And similarly, we have Emperor Caligula. Caligula is famous in history for an incredibly unpredictable and, frankly, highly controversial personality. The ancient historical traditions cite bizarre decisions and incredibly harsh behaviors, but just like with Nero, modern historians emphasize that there might be significant exaggeration in these ancient stories. Still, whether fully true or slightly exaggerated, the legacy of fear they left behind is undeniable. Moving on to Section 3, the Mongol Conquest, the 13th century Empire. This era brilliantly illustrates the dual legacy of Genghis Khan. On one side, he possessed extraordinary military genius, founding the Mongol Empire and building one of history's absolute largest land empires. But that exceptional leadership came at the cost of utter devastation. His conquests were extremely bloody, entire cities were completely destroyed, and countless people were killed. His name alone caused civilizations to surrender out of sheer terror before a single arrow was even fired. Section 4. Blood and Iron in Europe. Fear as a localized tactic.
First up in this era is Vlad III, the ruler of Wallachia in modern-day Romania. But he is far better known by his terrifying moniker, Vlad the Impaler. He earned this title because he favored an incredibly horrific method of punishment, impaling his enemies on sharp spikes and leaving them on display. It was a brutal, physical manifestation of fear meant to deter any invading armies or internal traitors. And what's wild is that, according to historians, this terrifying real-life figure later heavily inspired the pop culture myth of Dracula.
Then, in the 16th century, we see fear used in a totally different context, with Queen Mary I of England, historically known as Bloody Mary. She ruled during a time of intense religious differences and conflict. In her zealous attempt to enforce her authority, she had hundreds of individuals burned alive. This horrific policy firmly cemented her name among history's harshest and most feared rulers. Section 5. The First Russian Tsar, systemic ruthlessness.
Here we have Ivan IV, famously known as Ivan the Terrible. As the very first Tsar of Russia, he needed to establish absolute control over a vast and complex territory. To consolidate his power, he adopted incredibly strict policies and executed ruthless, unbending actions against any and all political opponents. His systemic use of terror left a profound, incredibly deep impact on the trajectory of Russian history, proving just how effective and devastating fear can be as an instrument of statecraft.
Section 6. Lessons from History. The Cost of Unchecked Power. So, what do we actually do with all this dark information? Well, history teaches us about a lot more than just grand victories and expanding borders. It teaches us the devastating results of the misuse of power. The stories of these rulers remind us that power, when used without justice, leaves deep, devastating impacts on the lives of millions of people. It's a stark warning about the catastrophic results of unchecked authority. I really hope this structured look at a darker side of history has been insightful for you. If you found this explainer helpful in breaking down these complex historical figures, please drop a like on this presentation, subscribe to our channel for more deep dives, and definitely leave a comment below.
And I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to discuss in those comments. Based on everything we've looked at today, or maybe from your own historical knowledge, who do you think was the absolute harshest ruler in history? Let me know your thoughts. Thank you so much for learning with me today, and I'll catch you in the next explainer. See ya.